Good evening, everybody. I hope you've got your coffee and cake at the ready. Norwich City head coach Daniel Farke has signed a 4-year contract extension at Norwich City until 2025. If he sees out that contract, he will become Norwich City's longest-serving manager ever, both in terms of games and in terms of years spent at the club, which would be fairly remarkable, really. Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt, of course. Want to get your reaction as well. So tell us your delight about this news that has broke about 10 minutes ago. Post it in the comments wherever you're watching this, and we'll flash some up on screen. And of course, answer any of your questions and comments that you may have around this one. Pad, first and foremost, confirmed. There's the picture. He's even put on a tie for the occasion. Norwich City head coach Daniel Farke, pictured with Stuart Webber, new contract 2025. That's very good news for Norwich, isn't it?
Yeah, he's looking sharp there, isn't he, old DF? No Onel Hernandez with a bucket of cold water around the corner either, I don't think, I would assume anyway. But that's great news. Yeah, my Twitter's gone in a meltdown in the last 12 minutes or so since they eventually pressed the button. I think it had been trailed. Obviously, Stuart Webber set the gun running, if that's not even a phrase, but when we spoke
to him, rolling, you mean, don't you?
Been a long day and I've been out in the heat, so we'll blame it on that. But when we went and had a chat with him at the end of last season, he just threw in, off his own bat, really, that Daniel was receptive to the idea of extending his contract. We all know the situation. Him and Stuart, 2022 was where they stood contractually, so he was on the cusp of going into his final 12 months. But Stuart basically said at the start of the summer they'd had conversations. He was open to the idea, and it was just a case of let him go away, have some time with his family, go back to Germany. And when he came back for pre-season, they would dot the I's and cross the T's, and it'd be out of the way before the start of the Premier League season. And they've been as good as their word, haven't they? Here we are, sort of 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks or so away from the kick-off, and one major block of uncertainty has been removed, and not just Daniel, but Chris Domagola, Eddie Reamer as assistant, and Christopher John as well. They've all signed up again for 2025. And if you look at the initial quotes that have come out from the club, Daniel is talking about his aim now is to try and establish Norwich as a Premier League entity, and Stuart is talking about that now gives them a level of certainty that they can plan mid to longer term, and they know Farke's at the helm and his key lieutenants are around him. So the only, as you said rightly in your intro, Connor, potentially, if he sees out this deal, he will be the longest-serving manager in Norwich's history, the only manager, coach to have won 2 league titles with this club. That's the echelons this guy is gravitating towards now in terms of the pantheon of Norwich managers and coaches that have gone before him. So, fantastic news. We can see the comments coming in. I think universally praise and delight, and hopefully this is the start of another positive chapter. So yeah, I think anybody who's a Norwich fan tonight is very happy, I would say.
Absolutely. Let us know as well, those of you watching, where does Daniel Farke rate for you in terms of Norwich City head coaches, managers? Does he now rank towards the top of that list? I'll be asking Pad the very same question in a moment. I'll just read you some of the reaction from Daniel in the obviously official release. We confirmed it at 5 o'clock, of course. He said, "I'm absolutely over the moon and feel pretty emotional in such a moment. I'm unbelievably grateful for all of the trust and support. It's a pleasure to be allowed to continue to work on this level with such a special club and our unbelievable owners, Delia and Michael. I must also thank Stuart Webber for his trust and backing, my staff and players, as well as the supporters. We have a pretty special relationship in this club. Now it's about going the next step, doing everything we can to make this club an established Premier League side. We're in a better position both as a club and as a group, and we want to continue to build something special and unique." He's of course second crack at the Premier League, isn't it? Didn't pan out too great 2 seasons ago, but of course a lot of mitigating circumstances that we've been through a lot, so we won't do that. But Pat, I'll throw that question over to you. In terms of Norwich City managers, where does he rank now for you? I guess there's still an element of that to be decided within the next 4 years, and that sort of chapter is yet to be written in terms of maybe his standing beyond the absolute elite, but he does seem to be climbing that ladder now, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's had 195 games in charge. Just the body of work. As I said, to repeat myself, the only manager, coach to have landed 2 league titles with this club. And ultimately, I think the key for me in terms of where you'd rank him, I think if we can see him deliver on the pledge that he's tried to promise in those initial signing quotes, that he wants to establish Norwich in the Premier League. If he's done that, by the end of this 4-year cycle, I mean, it's a moot point because obviously Norwich fans, and I'm not a Norwich fan, but Norwich fans will debate. You know, Ken Brown landed the first a major trophy. You know, Paul Lambert in his own way. We don't probably hold him in the highest regard at the minute, but I think in given where he ended up recently, but in decades to come, I think that'll be a notable achievement. And obviously the guys who got him into the Premier League, the Nigel Worthingtons of this world. But I think for me, Farke is on the path to being, if he keeps him in the Premier League and establishes him in the Premier League, I personally, just with my professional head on, that to me would rank him peerless. I don't think there would be another manager. But, you know, it's about eras. It's akin to who's your favourite player, who's the best player to put on a Norwich shirt. It is very subjective. There isn't any overriding criteria that we can apply universally to the Ron Saunderses, to the Ken Browns, to the Mike Walkers and what he did. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, given what he's already done, and let's be honest as well, it's not just about, you know, the win ratios or the amount of games. You know, look what he's done in terms of the transformational work with developing young players. You know, I've done a piece that's going up in about an hour. Tens and tens of millions of pounds that he has brought in through his coaching that has improved James Maddison, Jamal Lewis, Ben Godfrey, and obviously latterly Emi Buendia, and we can throw Max Aarons and Tom Campbell in there as well if they were to depart. You know, it isn't just what he's done on the pitch; it's how he's improved players and his coaching ability. And as I say, for me, 4 years on from now, he's still here. They're still in the Premier League. The best ever, I think.
Interesting stuff. We've got a few thoughts as well. Chris on YouTube has said, number one for me, I live through Walker, but Farke for me is number one due to the development of players and style of play. Adam Potter has said, fantastic news, especially pleased to hear him say he wants to become established in the Premier League. I wonder if Webber will upgrade ambitions from top 26. Keith Shaw, best news ever. Now to do the next part, which we'll come on to in a moment. I'm deliberately skipping around a few of these comments because we all come back to them. Ben on YouTube has said near the top just because of his great style of football and the fact that he's brought through many academy players. If he gets us to stay in the Premier League, then he will be the best in my lifetime. Jordan Cook on YouTube, what a lovely day. I think he's most definitely in the list for our greatest manager, if not for the football, for the work that's gone into the club's culture. We've got a load of reaction coming in as well. Ben on Facebook, he needs to keep us up to be a true great, but I love him and I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have here right now. He's a special guy in this day and age to stick around this long. Stephen on Facebook, always love watching a Daniel Farke team. And Simon, who's just put woo incredible, which I think seems to sum it up quite nicely. I guess that is obviously the next, if we broaden it out, the next thing, and we've already had loads of comments on it. I mean, Sam Hardy's asked it. Craig Brooks has asked it. We've had several others as well, and we'll come back on to Daniel in a minute. But this does feel for Norwich fans, I guess, and you mentioned their stability. That's one piece, isn't it? The next piece is surely Stuart Webber and his future and how that situation kind of sorts itself out.
Well, I mean, you know, it's quite telling that what's the first image they put out? Daniel in a sharp suit, but in a picture with Stuart Webber shaking his hand. And that is really that symbolism, I think, underlines, there we go. It underlines they are a partnership. They do come as a duo, as a team. And, you know, ultimately, up until this point, their contracts have mirrored the sort of work they've done albeit in slightly different areas of the football business. But, you know, ultimately, Norwich are where they are now, and what they've done over the last 4 years is those two. They are the kryptonite, really, of powering this unbelievable turnaround from what Webber inherited in 2017. It is remarkable, really, that we're now looking at a club who, you know, even with a period that we've all never had to live through and hopefully never do again before, but the financial purely impact of the pandemic and, you know, £30 million hole, all of these challenges have been thrown at them. And yet they've basically managed to put Norwich on a path to seemingly Premier League sustainability if they can pull off this next phase. And of course, Farke is one, part of that jigsaw, and Webber would be the other. I think we might find out a little bit more tomorrow. I don't think I'm breaching any confidences. That there's going to be a press conference with those two guys at Carrow Road, and we can be pretty sure that Stuart Webber will be asked about his own contractual status. Now, where we left off at the start of summer was Stuart saying, look, he's not going to leave Norwich in the lurch. He feels still that debt very deeply toward Delia and Michael for the faith they showed in him originally. And he talked also about, how maybe the pandemic and Brexit and those factors have altered his maybe initial desire, which he's always been quite open and honest about, to go and actually work abroad. And maybe the time isn't right, like in the next 12 months, next 18 months, until those things, are bedded in and we see what the world looks like in 2-3 years on. So, it sounded quite positive at the start of the summer, albeit you didn't get the sense that, as Daniel has pledged now, he was going to lock himself into another 3-4 year contract. But, we'll get a bit more insight tomorrow, I'm sure. But my reading of it is that Daniel doesn't sign on for 4 years unless he's got some assurances in terms of where Stuart is. Now, I'm not saying that in terms of Stuart saying, I'm going to sign on for 4 years, but maybe in the shorter term, beyond 22, that he's still going to be hanging around. Because if not, I'm not sure Daniel signs for 4 years, because they are a partnership and they have worked so brilliantly together. Stuart often says that they are different people and they do their different things outside of the football club, but as a chemistry, you can only look at what they've produced together on off the pitch in all areas of the business. The transformation at Colney in terms of the bricks and mortar, the development of young players that we talked about, and those comments as well are right. The style of football as well, not just winning football, not just title winning football in the Championship at least, but the panache and the style that they've actually put on the pitch as well. So I think this development today, this confirmation today, in terms of Stuart Webber, is pretty positive. How positive? We might get a bit more of an insight tomorrow when we go and speak to those guys at Carrow Road.
Yeah, it's very much watch this space, isn't it? And of course, we'll never know how sort of interlinked. Well, maybe we'll find out tomorrow how interlinked their sort of respective futures are. But it does feel like if you've been brought in by somebody and you're going to sign a contract to stay, and currently in current contracts, Farke will outstay Webber, won't he, at Norwich City in terms of their respective sort of expiry dates on their contracts now. It would feel like from Webber's part there would need to be some sort of assurance, some sort of glimmer maybe that he's sticking around for Daniel Farke to commit, because and again I'll repeat the word he used in the club releases, stability. It's that element, isn't it? It's all very well and good. You've got essentially two senior people on the football side, all very well and good that one commits their future, but then you kind of need both to do that, don't you, in order to get that stability that Stuart Webber's talking about? Well,
you do, or possibly that there's a successor in place in terms of, from inside the club, and then Daniel can, away from maybe the public glare, start to build or is already building that type of relationship. Don't need to put the names in the frame. We all know who they are, who potentially they could be. So I think ultimately the way they've worked together, I think it leans for me more towards Stuart is staying beyond 22, because he said as much at the start of the summer, for those reasons I've already stated, that he'd be receptive and open to it. And I think the actual phrase was, I won't leave this club in the lurch. So if that is the case and that there isn't a successor lined up, then I think we can safely assume he will be here beyond 22. But how far beyond and in what type of structure contractually that looks like, we wait to find out. But as I say, you can guarantee he will be asked about his own future tomorrow, given he's appearing with Daniel at Carrow Road. So, maybe by this time tomorrow, we'll have a bit more of a firm answer to these questions.
Yeah, and we'll be asking them, won't we? So we know they'll definitely be asked about it. So Norwich fans don't need to worry too much about that. A few more answers in terms of where Daniel ranks more generally in terms of Norwich City managers. Jamie Lauder on YouTube has said second greatest manager in my opinion. Walker tops it, but I love Daniel Farke. Mark on Facebook has said, I've supported Norwich City for 35 years, and under Daniel Farke we've played some of the best football ever. Uncle Mort on YouTube as well, not my uncle, I hasten to add. So it's not just that he's brought youngsters through, it's that the youngsters are coming here because of him. And we're seeing that now, aren't we? Norwich are a very attractive place for young players. You just have to look in some of their recruitment and some of the talents they've been able to attract to Carrow Road. This one's made me laugh from Jamie as well, Paddy, who reckons that you sound a bit like Sean Dyche.
I read that, yeah. I'm not seeing that at all. Unless is he from the Midlands, Sean Dyche? Maybe he is.
I'd have to look it up. I'll look it up when you're giving the next answer. Actually,
as long as nobody
says northern twang.
Yeah, I did as well. As long as nobody says I look like him, then we'll be all right. But move on.
That's true. Nick has said Daniel Farke expresses his gratitude for being allowed to coach the club every chance he gets, and that gratitude is absolutely reciprocated by the fans. His contract extension is brilliant news. Chris says they've got to be one of the best duos since Morecambe and Wise. I'm guessing he's talking about Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke as opposed to us, Pad. But
definitely, mate, definitely.
We'll take it. Jonathan Parker on Facebook hits a long and nice point, and I'll ask you about this. He said, "How nice to finally have a long-term manager," and there is that element, isn't there? Norwich City breaking the mold a little bit in terms of. Yeah. And we've seen this, I guess, throughout Delia and Michael's reign at the club. Managers do get time. Head coaches do get time to put plans in place, to put their ideas across, to get success, which is probably quite a rare commodity now, particularly in English football, but increasingly in world football as well. I think as things stand, he's the third, maybe the fourth longest serving manager in the Premier League behind Klopp, Dyche, and I believe there's another who may have escaped my mind at the minute, which I'll come back to. But it is a rare point, isn't it, for a manager to be given such a vote of confidence. A 4-year contract for a manager is pretty rare in sort of these times.
Yeah, I mean, my mind immediately springs to what did Pardew get at Newcastle that time? I mean, he didn't see
6,
it out,
wasn't it? No, it was 8, I think, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. No, that was ridiculous. But 4 years is pretty unheard of. I really can't think of too many managers. In the last sort of seasons past who are getting based on the fact he's already done 4. You know, it's not he's 12 months into his first term. This is a guy who's got 4 years' work already under his belt at that club, and with a fair wind, he'll have another 4 as well. And that, as I say, I mean, you only have to look, and it's not just the modern aspect or the comparative. As we said at the start, if he serves those 8 years, he will be Norwich's longest ever serving manager. I think Ken Brown did 7. I think John Bond did a good thick end of 7. I think Worthy did about 6. So, historically as well as modern day, this is pretty unheard of. But you're right, Connor. It does cut to the heart of what Stuart said really from day one when he moved in, that they're not buffeted and not everything is defined by this quest for 3 points on a Saturday. Of course, you need to win games of football to achieve what you want to on the pitch, for everything else to flow from that. But it isn't kind of, you lose 5 games or whatever and then you're out the door. But I mean, we only have to go back to the Project Restart period. Okay, you could talk about, well, Daniel wasn't really, and Stuart himself was the first to admit subsequently that in terms of recruitment, they didn't support him enough. But, how many consecutive defeats were there during that period? And there were question marks outwardly going into that summer prior to last season, but certainly not internally. I remember the quote that Stuart said, "As long as I'm here, Daniel Farke will be the head coach here." And you could take that as a very cheap throwaway line, but actions like giving this guy another 4 years would indicate that they actually believe that firmly believe that putting down roots, particularly in key positions within a football club, and is there a bigger, more influential position than the manager, the first team manager? Certainly not in a sort of sporting director model, that it really underlines, I think. And, okay, it might be tough for him again this season in the Premier League, and there's no guarantees. I think we all know it's going to be tough to stay up again. But still, overall, there can't be any denying that this club is in a far healthier state in every aspect that we've already discussed this afternoon, for, I think, having a bit more of a mid to longer term view about how they plan, how they try and execute those plans, rather than, we lost on a Saturday, the world's about to cave in. Daniel's always very keen to sort of take a more holistic view about it, and it's very difficult when you're in the midst of losing games of football. But I think ultimately Norwich should be commended for embarking on this path in 2017 and now being so far down it that, a 4-year deal, certainly inside the Norwich bubble, that doesn't seem out of the ordinary. Whereas I'm sure outside now, if we were to canvass opinion across the wider football world right now as this news is breaking, I think there'll be plenty of eyebrows inside and outside football that, giving a manager a 4-year contract in this day and age, because it is unheard of, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it does feel like, even though maybe Norwich's position in the Premier League next season, irrespective of how that might go, he still feels like he's got one of the most secure jobs, doesn't he? And I guess for someone in that position as well, to have that opportunity, and a lot of the comments mentioned young players, you can only do that if you're given trust and you're told, in the short term, results, as certainly Daniel was told at the start, results aren't the be all and end all. It's about performances and growth and green shoots, I suppose, as well. And that's really important, isn't it, for a head coach? And again, we mentioned it's kind of rare in football now, which has become all about short-term success and winning, and maybe less so about sustainability and stability. In Daniel Farke, I guess, from his perspective, he's got the perfect opportunity now to really shape a club to his values. And we talk about the culture and the playing style that's embedded all the way from the first team down to the youngest years in the academies now. They all want to play Daniel Farke's style of football to develop those young players. For him, that must be a really nice position to be in compared to perhaps some of his colleagues around the country who do have to stay in the Premier League, for example, to keep their jobs.
Well, I mean, it's quite clear. He openly admitted after the first championship title win, so the summer of 2019, he had offers to leave the club. And he also went on to say further that offers where he would have had far bigger budgets in terms of transfer windows. I'm sure the financial inducements for him personally would have been far better than he could have commanded at Norwich. Yet he stayed, and then he stayed again when they went down. And I'm sure his stock was still of a high enough level, given the restrictions he was working under in that Premier League season, that he would have got another job. And I haven't spoken to him about this summer so far. We've only really had the touch point at Kings Lynn, but I'm pretty sure off the back of repeating what he did in the Championship, there will have been interest. I mean, he was getting linked to one or two positions back in Germany, wasn't he, at the early part of the summer? And I think if we were to ask him, he'd probably say, well, there were opportunities he could have explored. But the fact that he wants to stay here and wants to pledge another 4 years of his life, bearing in mind he's a guy with a very young family back in Germany, it is a huge commitment for him to basically base himself, not just in England, but in this part of the world for that length of time. He clearly feels he's in an environment, a footballing coaching environment, where he can find everything he needs in terms of the backing. He talks again about the trust in this latest press release from Delia Michael downwards. The love that he feels towards those fans. He said some lovely stuff around when they clinched the title, obviously against Reading that day. No fans sadly allowed in Cairo, but he was the one who led the celebrations with that pocket of fans who gathered along that strip of land that's behind the City stand. And he talked about he couldn't wait, or he longed for the day when fans were allowed back in, and that was the one big thing that was really missing from the Championship title second time around. He really has bought into what it is to be part of the Norwich family. He has that affinity. My heart is green and yellow. My life, my second home is Norwich. He said all these things in the past, and he means it, because there's no doubt about it. He has had opportunities to leave and to probably go in the short term, at least to easier coaching situations, not paying for the sins of the past, as he spoke about in the transfer window going into the Premier League era. Even now, having to accept your best player, arguably Emi Buendia, being sold to Aston Villa for many millions, but ultimately, with a purely coaching perspective, his chances of getting Norwich to stay in the Premier League are enhanced, you would think, by having Emi Buendia still on the payroll. But no, he talked about it after the Kings Lynn game. He understood separate that the player himself maybe wanted to move on, but he understood from the club's point of view rather than maybe from his own coaching point of view first and foremost. And now that's pretty rare that, you do have a guy who, yes, he wants to be a success as a coach on an individual level, but he understands what Norwich are trying to do and the environment he's in. And as I say, these are pretty special times, I think, because you don't get too many men as well as coaches who come along like Daniel Farke, and Norwich are fortunate to have him. But by the same token, he's obviously feels he's fortunate and blessed and proud and privileged to be in charge of this football club. So, it's a great marriage at the minute.
It says a lot of him, doesn't it, as a human being, and maybe his kind of ability to zoom out a little bit and maybe not look short term as many managers do, that he didn't jump ship when an opportunity arose. I think that has been the frustration in some cases. I guess we could reference Paul Lambert, even you could probably reference Mike Walker going back a little bit further in terms of those managers that have not used Norwich as a stepping stone, because that's probably not fair to say, but certainly have left relatively early on after success because an opportunity has arisen. That obviously wasn't the case with Daniel, stuck with Norwich through relegation. Let's get a few more of your comments on this news. Churchy on YouTube, it says, as fans, we need to stand by the club and support Daniel throughout the season ahead. Lars says, great news, a nice happy face. Chris Dayton has gone back and said we're the third greatest year. So I think we can take that, Pad, can't we? I mean that's not a bad top three. So
bronze medal. Bronze medal in the Olympic cycle would take that, Connor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to have a bronze medal than none at all, isn't it? So that's always refreshing. This is a good question from Nick, actually. I'll let you answer this first, Pad, and then I'll come in. Massive fan of Farke. Would like to know what you think his strongest attribute is. Pad, I'll throw that across to you first, and then I'll weigh in afterwards.
Well, it's difficult to pick out just one, isn't it? But what sticks in my mind is a quote Ben Gibson said after the promotion was secured this time round, and it was almost like he's never worked. I think it was something along the lines of he's never worked with a coach who sees the things he sees like in game or on a training field. His eye for detail and just the intelligence of the guy. That there's a player. All his life has been academy and then professional football. Been around some decent coaches, Ben Gibson, but almost putting Farke on a pedestal as some sort of coaching visionary. And you only have to take a step back and look at what he's done with those younger players. Yes, they have raw talent, your Max Aaronses, your Jamals, your Ben Godfrey, sorry. But he's moulded that talent and he's extracted the maximum from it. Ben Godfrey, I see him as a not an average defensive midfielder. I see him as a world-class centre-back. He almost got laughed for that comment. Look at him now. He was almost in England's Euro squad and has come off the back of a brilliant season for Everton as a centre-back. That was Daniel Farke who saw that and converted him and then worked on him and developed the raw natural ability that he felt he had in that position. So I think if I was to pin one down, as tough as that would be, it probably is just, he seems to be, you don't want to bracket him with, lads like Guardiola and Klopp and what have you, because they're seen as, almost, as Jose said that time, not out of the bottle, but a bit special. But, if Ben Gibson is anecdotally talking in those terms, then, he has a far better reference point than we do because he's working with him day in and day out. This guy, coaching-wise, is a little bit special. And as I say, look at his CV. He's took a team who were heading the wrong way. He's brought them to the Premier League once on the back of a title, went down, he's brought them there again. So, it is a phenomenal body of work he's building at Norwich.
It definitely is. You mentioned Guardiola and Klopp, two people that have a lot of respect for Daniel Farke as well, which speaks volumes, doesn't it? I'll weigh in. I'll add, I think, his kind of level-headedness, that never too high, never too low attitude. I think even kind of in the midst of that relegation season, but equally in the two promotion winning seasons, he's kind of stayed consistent, hasn't he? He hasn't been particularly emotional about things certainly in the moment. If there's something to react to, he always seems to be quite level-headed, seems to say the right thing at the right time, which is a player, and again, we'll use that word as stability, and as someone, if you're a player looking for leadership in the time where the Premier League season wasn't going particularly well, I think that's probably a major positive. And then equally, if you do allow yourself to get carried away a little bit after a string of good wins, he's there just to pull you back a little bit, and that's a really important element for a leader and a manager, I suppose. And that's what I would say is maybe not his strongest attribute, because I think Pad is probably right in terms of a coaching element, but certainly in terms of a leadership element, I'll offer that perspective. Let's see what else we've got in terms of comments. Craig says Deitch is from Kettering. That's not too far from Coventry, is it? From my geography?
No, that's not too far at all. Yeah.
No,
but
there you go.
Is he saying? I mean, Deitch always strikes me as a man who's smoked too many cigarettes. But there you go.
Yeah, he doesn't have the Paul Cook voice change though, does he? Which I guess is a positive. I don't know if you've ever watched any interviews with him, but yeah, they're quite interesting viewing. Diane, anyway, back to Daniel Farke, has just put great news. We'll come to the Todd Campbell stuff in just a moment, so I'll skip those comments. We've had this comment as well from Young Riles. I'll say apologies if I've said that wrong. He has said that the fact that Farke commands such respect from Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp speaks volumes. And we've spoken about style of play. The fact that Pep Guardiola said that he likes to watch Norwich City in his spare time, that's a big thing, isn't it, for a coach who has the accolades that he has? Certainly is one of the best in footballing history. That's probably the biggest sort of lump of praise we can give to Daniel Farke, really, and what he's built at Norwich City compared to the situation that he inherited, where in the first season, Norwich finished below Ipswich Town, didn't they? So that goes to give an indication of perhaps what he's built over the last 4 years or so. Yeah,
respect from your peers. I mean, that really, the value, Farke would value the opinions of those guys far more than, the likes of us in the media or probably even fans, to be fair, because, they're in there, they're at the coalface. Those two are at the elite end of the game, and they recognise a very astute, very innovative coach. Quite rightly named the manager of the year by his championship rivals, and you could tell by the quotes that he gave when he received that, he was genuinely touched that his work was recognised for what it was, the best in the division. So yeah, there's no doubt about it. He is one of the best coaching brains, certainly in the English game. I think that's safe to say.
How high can Daniel Farke go for you? Where can he reach in terms of coaching? If we're going to talk about this contract being 8 years of body of work, where can he go? I don't want to look too far ahead because football it changes enough in a week, let alone in 4 years. But let's say he does see out that contract and he does become Norwich's longest serving manager. Where does he go to next? How high up that sort of ladder can he climb in terms of football generally? When we're talking about kind of people like Guardiola, is he someone that can manage a club at Champions League level, as of course Stuart Webber mentioned when he was first appointed? Is that probably the next step for him beyond Norwich if we're to look very far ahead?
Well, I mean, you literally just took the words out. That was and that is what Stuart Webber, and probably will say it again tomorrow to us. He thinks Daniel is a Champions League grade coach and will, not even a debate, will coach in the Champions League. So, if it's this country, you're talking a very select group of clubs who would be considered Champions League material, top 5, top 6, top 7 at a push. And probably in Germany, again, top 4 or top 5 clubs. I think ultimately, I don't know, we can't speak for the man himself. He might give us an idea as to what next if we ask him that tomorrow. But I could see a scenario where if he's done what he feels he wanted to do in those 4 years at Norwich, and hopefully that is sustainability in the Premier League, then I think he gets a top job in Germany and goes back there. And, as I said earlier, for a guy who's come here, left his young family behind in Germany for this amount, I mean, that'll be getting on for a decade. I mean, that's a huge chunk of his life. And as much as he loves it here in these surroundings, the pull of home, I think would be very strong by that stage. And ultimately, if at the end of that there was a Champions League opportunity with a club in the Bundesliga, and I would hope from a Norwich perspective, I'd hope he'd go that route, because I don't think any of us would like to see him in charge of another English team. I don't think that would be quite an unpalatable prospect, really. So if he was going to go, then let him go back to Germany and prove what Webber thinks he is, which is a Champions League coach.
Still incredibly young for a coach, isn't he? Only 44. He's not going to be 50 by the time he leaves Norwich City. So still a huge portion of his managerial career to play out. I wonder if that's come into his thinking and maybe slow down the urgency of that next step, that next move, because we mention it with players, don't we? They develop to a certain stage and then it's about making that next step at the right time. And I think we've seen probably Ben Godfrey do that. James Maddison certainly do that. I wonder if Daniel Farke is thinking the same in terms of that when that next step does arrive. And you've mentioned German clubs. I guess the natural one is Dortmund, isn't it, that people will throw out. We know he's a Bayern Munich fan, which I'm sure he'd like to do that job again. Maybe he'd need to go and do another one in Germany before he got there. But all of these kind of interesting things. I just wonder if after 8 years and that body of work, and like you say, we'll probably find out more tomorrow in terms of where his thinking is at, whether that next step becomes a bit more natural. This is an interesting question from Freddie on YouTube, who said, do you think the length of contract is similar to the Max Aarons style long-term deals? We don't expect him to stay for 4 years, but it'll help the club out if he does move on.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. I mean, and obviously, it's understandable. The contractual length is 4 years, so we're extrapolating that he's here for the 4 years. But, as much as Norwich like to put down mid to longer term planning in place, to quote that hypothetical example there, Dortmund come for him in 18 months, 2 years. That would be very tough to turn down for him, I'm sure, or another German Champions League grade club. And I don't think, let's be honest, if he was to go mid that 4 year cycle to a club of that stature offering them those opportunities, I don't think there'd be any sort of fallout. I don't think any Norwich fan would begrudge him that type of move, because they would feel, I'm sure, that what he's achieved, he'd, much like with Maddison, much like with maybe Ben Godfrey and maybe Buendia to a lesser extent, depending on where you think Villa's horizons lie, an opportunity to go on to the next level. And I think maybe it is being a little bit romantic to sort of talk in terms of his year for 4 more years, and that'll take him past Ken Brown and longest serving Norwich manager ever. I guess we just have to work season to season for this period. But the Aarons one is a very fair point. It does insulate Norwich if that scenario, for example, played out and a Dortmund came for him in 18 months, 2 years. He is under contract, and clearly they would have to recognise that fact, and Norwich would get a sizable sum, I'm sure. But I don't think, different to a player leaving, it doesn't really compensate you, because the manager coach is such an integral position and so all pervasive and all overarching over everything that the club are trying to do. I think just getting a monetary compensation value isn't really going to soften the blow of losing a man who has left such a mark on this football club. So yes, I can see the financial element of putting him on a 4-year deal in terms of insulating Norwich to a degree, but also I can see scenarios down the track if he keeps Norwich up this season, doing well the following season, that there will be opportunities, and they may be at a level where he feels he wants to take them. So probably unlikely. He sees out the 4 years, but we live in hope, don't we?
Absolutely. Well, what is it? He always said at the back end of the last season, "I don't break contracts," is what he said, isn't it? So, yeah. I guess we'll be putting that quote to the test. It's interesting this, and to bring this kind of back to the Webber debate, and then we'll kind of take some questions on other matters, which I can see are flooding in, particularly around one subject in particular. It's interesting because I remember Ed Balls talking about when Norwich decided to go down this route and split that kind of conventional manager role into sporting director and head coach, and the idea was that sporting director brings you the stability, and that's the one that you kind of plan around, and then the head coach not becomes more dispensable, but if there is a situation where you have to remove it, it's then it doesn't completely kind of shift in a different direction, the club, in terms of style and culture and whatnot. And of course, when a coach leaves and you've kind of mapped it out there, they take the backroom staff with them. Players inevitably change. There could be a change in the style of play. We're kind of seeing that the reverse of that now, aren't we? We're seeing the head coach commit, and that's the stability. And now kind of the conversation will be around the sporting director and what he decides to do next. It's kind of a flip on maybe what Norwich City's board were expecting a few years ago. No,
exactly, yeah. And I'm sure they didn't envisage that this would be the case. But again, it flows back to where Stuart's head is at beyond, the end of his current contract, 2022. And I'm increasingly, when he was openly talking in terms of very relaxed about it, it's not an issue inside the club. Could quite happily see myself staying beyond. I don't think you come out and say things like that in the public domain, given how they will be interpreted. If you're not pretty sure in your own mind and have communicated that to maybe Delia and Michael that you are willing to extend, I just think the aspect of it that is a bit uncertain is in what manner is it? Like Paul Lambert, I think towards the end he had like rolling contracts, didn't he? Where it wasn't as Daniels and his backroom team have signed in the last few days, a fixed 4-year period. So whether the contractual element looks a little bit different, maybe, but. Again, I repeat what I said. I think Daniel has had the assurances he would have wanted from Stuart that he's in it beyond this final 12 months of his contracted current deal. So, but you're right. You're right. In terms of the stability, you look at those two positions, and it really should be the anchor, should be the sporting director role, because he is the person who's setting the culture, developing the philosophy, has oversight and final say in all the key football areas of the business and the financial aspects of that as well. That's really, you're right, that's really where you'd like to feel there was that security that we now have maybe on the head coach side with Daniel extending his deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to wrap this up then, Hamish Jolly, when was the last time Daniel Farke was in a suit? He looks the bee's knees in the promotion photo with Webber. Here's to another 4 years. I don't think he even wore certainly a shirt and tie when he became head coach, did he? I think it was just a shirt, if memory serves, but I could be wrong on that. We know Stuart Webber doesn't like wearing ties. Anyway, let's go to the transfer stuff, because we've had a few questions, mainly revolving a certain Todd Cantwell. Oliver Middleton has just put thoughts on the Cantwell rumours. This has emerged this afternoon, hasn't it? Football Insider reporting that Aston Villa are in, I'll use inverted commas, advanced talks to sign Todd Cantwell. Pads, our understanding of that, certainly nothing imminent. Todd posted a picture on his social media accounts, didn't he, today, of the pictures at Colney, which would suggest nothing is imminent. There's no way he's in Birmingham doing a medical or anything like that. Talk to us a little bit about these reports and sort of your understanding of them.
You're right, Connor. Yeah, advanced negotiations. If they are, then they're not being participated in by Stuart Webber or Norwich. So I don't know where that one's come from. I mean, that report, there's a few inaccuracies in there as well. If you read through it, the contractual situation, they're saying he's in the final year of his contract. Technically, there's an option which you can be sure the club would exercise. So it's 2023. That lessens the urgency for it to be done. Clearly, if he was, a bit like we just spent the last 40 minutes discussing, if you got to the last 12 months of Todd Cantwell's deal, you'd be definitely wanting to get it resolved in this window. So that's inaccurate. The talk of Leeds having £15 million bids. There was no bids for Tom Cantwell last summer, and I'm talking bids in terms of Aston Villa picking up the phone. Stuart, yep, we'd like to take Emi Buendia. This is what we're going to pay. Is this sufficient? Nothing of that nature. So as we stand, Todd Cantwell is firmly part of Norwich's plans for the Premier League season, and that's where we are. So now, if you're asking me, given that the lines of communication between Villa and Norwich would have been open over Buendia this summer, and Stuart Webber and his Oppo would have had plenty of conversations around that, will there have been a conversation about Todd Cantwell? Quite possibly. It's not the first time that he's been linked to Aston Villa this window. They clearly, they're getting heavily linked with Smith Rowe. I think they've had 2 or 3 bids rejected for him from Arsenal, haven't they? So, it looks like that attacking midfield, creative midfield type is a player they're trying to bring in on top of bringing in Emi. And if that was the case, and particularly, again, Smith Rowe's profile, young English talent, Todd Cantwell would be on that watch list, wouldn't he? It's inevitable because he fits the profile. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's a player Villa would be looking at. But certainly, right here, right now, advanced talks, no, that's wide of the mark. So we can only repeat what Stuart said when asked about Todd's situation. He said, ultimately, the urgency isn't there because of that year's option this window, but clearly that is something that needs to be resolved. He either gets a new deal and he stays at Norwich, or a solution is found whereby he departs. All I would say is, there's a lot of people around these type of stories, agents and so on and so forth. And a lot of this is fueled by agent talk. So I would take that for what it is. Certainly Todd Cantwell is not, or Norwich for that matter, more pertinently, are not in advanced negotiations with Villa over the sale of Todd Cantwell. Right here, right now, that is the position. So anything else you hear to that point is wide of the mark.
There you go. I'm not sure I've got much more to add to that, really. I think Villa have been linked with Leon Bailey as well today from Leverkusen, who is an attacking midfielder. You mentioned Smith Rowe there. It seems like they've moved on from him. They, of course, still have Jack Grealish in the building as well. So that's not a bad team they're building there. But, yeah, certainly not imminent as some things are suggesting. I think Football Insider also said that Norwich were preparing an upbid for Christopher Raya, which of course we know it wasn't the case. So there you go. Yeah, you have to take these things with a pinch of salt, but that's why we all love the transfer window, isn't it? A few more on Daniel Farke. Nick has said, I feel Daniel has been able to create a team greater than the sum of its individual parts, in complete contrast, for example, to an Arsenal. Huge praise for maintaining that feat for 4 years now. Adam has just said there's only one DF. He's clearly forgotten about Dave Freezer, our colleague, but that's fine. I won't tell him. It's all good. Fred has just said, any more transfer news? And it's all been pretty quiet this week, hasn't it? We of course had Daniel's position after the Kings Lynn game in terms of the areas of the squad that he'd like to strengthen, but certainly in terms of incomings, it's been a quiet week this week. Yeah, no, this week was always, I think, envisaged to be, well, of course, the Premier League pre-season games cranking up. 2 more games this week. Kings Lynn on the Friday. There was a Grant Hanley contract renewal on the Monday. They knew Daniels was obviously earmarked for this one, and then we had the pair, Lise Malou. Firstly, coming through quarantine, and then quite an eventful debut yesterday. So, no, I don't. I think this week was probably more of an internal sort of inward looking rather than. But clearly, there's work going on in the background. But nothing that we're led to believe. Gibbs, the lad from Ipswich, that looks pretty close to getting done now. I think there's colleagues in Suffolk are saying that the fee has been agreed.
he's definitely coming. That part of the equation has been long since settled, but just in terms of until they agree compensation-wise with Ipswich, then they couldn't confirm that. So that might happen back end of the week. But no, in terms of senior frontline options, I think they've had a few too many of the plates they needed to spin this week. So possibly that'll pick up now once we get through Huddersfield on Friday and then into, a bit closer to the Premier League kickoff. But there's no doubt about it that you haven't seen the last of the signings.
No, absolutely not. As Daniel said on Friday as well, and I think their minds have probably been on contracts and whatnot. We've seen Sorensen, Hanley, exactly. Farke as well now, Barley Mumba. So that seems to be where the focus has been in the last week or so. Again, that could shift very, very, very quickly as the transfer window happens. This is an interesting question from Carl, which I think we might end on. Which says, how far do you think Daniel Farke could take City if theoretically he did stay until 2025? Paddy, Carl's kind of asking us to get the crystal ball out a little bit and look into the future. What do you reckon in terms of that? Do you think he's made little secret of his desire to establish Norwich City as a Premier League club? Could he look beyond that? Could Norwich fans look beyond that in the next 4 years, do you feel?
I've just had a vision. I can see these clips getting reproduced on social media when he's sacked in 12 months' time for equaling his club record losing run. I'm joking, of course, but ultimately, what is Norwich's success built on? It's not just Farke, it's not just Webber. It's this kind of structural approach that runs now, permeates all through the club, or at least is trying to. So if that environment stays the same, and obviously, again, we have to keep repeating, if Stuart Webber hangs around a little bit longer than 2022, there's certainly going to be set. I mean, you can see it this window now. It's starting to shift in terms of what they can do financially, the muscle they can flex in terms of the transfer window, the shedding of the baggage that they've had to carry in previous windows, sins of the past, that quote again. So if that's only going to continue, and in windows to come now, they can bring a higher grade of player in and a higher grade of player in. We know with this guy's coaching ability, he will be able to extract even more from higher quality resource. It stands to reason. So if that is the case, then I think in the initial period, it's staying in the Premier League this time around. And then, it's hard to bookmark what the maximum limits of their ambition could be, but is there any reason they couldn't be in the top half of the Premier League and have decent cup runs and who knows, maybe occasionally threaten to get into European positions? That's probably too unrealistic, but certainly to establish themselves as a top 10 Premier League club who can go pretty deep in cup competitions and maybe even get to one or two finals, then I think that would be a remarkable state of affairs if he could engineer that. But there's a lot of hard work to do on the initial process now, which is you've got up. Can you stay up this time?
There we go. I'm muted. I was going to say if Daniel Farke walks away in 2025 and Norwich have stayed in the Premier League for 4 more years, then that's a real success, isn't it? Forget anything else. That will be a success in terms of established. Right, 2 more questions, and then we will call it a day. We'll start with Peaky NCFC on YouTube, who said, any more contracts to hear of? Pad, what do you reckon? Do you think there's some more in the pipeline?
No, I think from what we're led to believe, that's probably it now from the existing tranche. It wasn't going to be the 2 seasons ago where, the cook, the cleaner, the bottle washer, everybody was getting a new contract. But this time around, it was going to be more targeted, more nuanced than the 3 players and Farke. Unless they've had a change of heart, I think that's probably it in terms of the existing personnel.
Cool. And then the final one from MAA Arms, which is a great name. Do you know when the away kit will be announced? I guess it will be relatively soon, won't it? I'm trying to think if they play anyone in yellow in pre-season. That's usually a good indication, but I'm not sure they do. I guess next couple of weeks probably for the away kit we're looking at.
Yeah, do you know what? Again, it's kind of slipped down a pecking order in terms of touching base with the club in this week anyway. But we'll put the question in next 24 hours. So, next time we do one of these, we should have an answer. But yeah, it's going to be fairly sharpish, I would have thought, because ultimately getting kit into shops is what it's all about, to hopefully sell the units they want to sell. So, you need to maximise the window you've got for selling kit, haven't you? So I'll be interested. I'll keep repeating what I say whenever we get kit conversation. No petrol blue kit, please, this time around.
Absolutely not. No, I think we've had enough of petrol blue, haven't we? I think that will do us nicely. Daniel Farke and his backroom staff all pen new Norwich City deals until 2025. Here's some reaction from the man itself. Well, that doesn't seem to be coming out, so I'll flash up the picture of him and Webber to wave us out. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you have the opportunity this evening to join to enjoy a little bit of coffee and cake, as I'm sure Daniel will be doing. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, PinkUn.com, the place to go for all the latest Norwich City news. More on Daniel Farke's contract as well, and we'll of course bring you full coverage of that press conference with those two men tomorrow. It's bound to be a fascinating one, I'm sure. Pad, thank you very much. Enjoy the sun, everyone, and we'll see you again very, very soon.